watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Irish News columnist Allison Morris and Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Eye leads with the Conservative Party row over how to pay for the economic burden of COVID-19. The paper reports Rishi Sunak's budget will target pensions, second homes and companies in a bid to raise £30 billion. The Daily Express says there's uproar at the Treasury's plans to cut pension tax relief. Same story for The Telegraph. MPs and business leaders have warned the Chancellor that tax rises could choke recovery. The Times reveals that most managers and professionals are choosing to work from home. The Guardian reports in the budget crisis sparked by the cost of COVID safety in schools. The sale of video app TikTok's US operations may now be in doubt because of new Chinese rules over technology exports. That's according to the Financial Times. The Daily Mail reports the plastic bag tax will increase from 5p to 10p in small shops and takeaways. As 9 million pupils return to school this week, the Mirror claims it's the biggest test yet to contain the spread of COVID-19. And bad news about tomorrow's bank holiday weather in the Star. It's going to be colder than Christmas. Not great news there, and we're joined tonight by Irish News columnist Allison Morris and Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Welcome back to both of you. Let's start with the Express and their front page there. It's reported in many of the other papers, the Eye and the Telegraph as well. Speculation about whether this government is going to raise taxes in order to pay for, all of the money that's been handed out by Rishi Sunak. Alison, you have a go at this one for us first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it should come as much of a surprise to us that the government's going to have to put something in place to try and claw back the money that it's been spending. We know if you look at the small business grants, the furlough scheme, all of the other money that was spent during lockdown, it all had to be paid back eventually, and I think most of us knew that. These stories today are suggesting that money is going to come back by taxing big business and the more wealthy, and I do think that for optics at least there'll have to be some of that. But in reality, that we know in times of recession in the past, that money has came from public services. It has had a more impact on those who are already struggling financially. We know that the furlough scheme is masking mass unemployment, especially like the hospitality sector, and that's only going to get worse as we run into the winter months. So I think that it's something that we all should have seen coming. I think what it will be interesting to see is how the government manages to cope with the internal row within its own party, because clearly this is very controversial given the deal with the mess that we're looking ahead to.
And Peter, from what we read, there is a division between the Treasury and Number 10, and as Alison's alluding to there, lots of Tories quite nervous about it all.
Well, so there should be. These stories reflect a struggle which is undoubtedly going on at the moment in Whitehall and Westminster before Parliament comes back, with Tory MPs increasingly worried about the security of their seats and their jobs, as they see, having been elected on promises of all kinds of wonders and glories, they find themselves will be the most severe tax rises and the most savage cuts in public services in modern history. I think we might be going back to 1929, 1931 territory, the way the economy has in fact been strangled, and the amounts of money which have been borrowed by the government are so gigantic, they simply pass beyond the dreams of any peacetime government. There's no precedent for this outside wartime, when of course you're in a totally different situation. So we really do have a big problem here, and these headlines are reflecting it. The problem is there is no resolution. The government is divided between those who hope to try and win the next election and those who realise that if they don't straighten out the economy, or at least try to do so, things will be even worse not far down the line. And sooner or later, the realists will have to win. But of course, the unrealists, who still think that they can get away without it, will fight to the last moment if they possibly can. But the real news for everybody is that as September arrives and the nights draw in and the cold weather comes, then there will be metaphorical cold and wet weather in the economy as well. Jobs increasingly disappearing that's been maintained by furlough schemes, and all kinds of other nasty surprises are coming your way well before Christmas.
Yes, and Alison, the Telegraph is warning that tax rises will actually choke any recovery.
I think there's a lot in that. The fact is that you can't just be seen to be cutting services and taking money off those who are already most vulnerable, and the government has to, at least for the optics of it, put some of the burden of trying to pay back this £30 billion a year that they need to raise in relation to that will have to come from the sort of super rich and from the top end of that scale. But that's not going to solve the immediate problem. And the fact is that as well as the borrowing, which needs to be paid back, we still haven't seen the full impact of lockdown, especially on smaller businesses and other sectors such as the hospitality sector. And I think that in the coming months, you're going to see the actual full impact of that. And I think things are going to be a hell of a lot worse for a lot of people who are going to find themselves out of work at a time when basic goods and services have become far more expensive.
Let's move to the Times now, looking at people going back to work, Peter.
Well, it is extraordinary that people are still refusing, in many cases, to go back to work. But you have to remember two things. One, a lot of people have discovered that they can get away with working from home, that their employers have allowed them to do it. They continue to get paid. They don't have to do the long, boring, crowded commute. They have much more time at home and they feel good about it. And it still hasn't come home to them just how serious it will be if they don't come back to work, because actually, ultimately, most major enterprises have to operate on the basis that people are in direct contact with each other. How, apart from anything else, can younger people beginning careers learn how to do their jobs if they're not in the presence of people who are more experienced all the time? So they
But
have
what
to
about
come
if they're
back.
more productive at home?
Well, who says they're more productive? I can't see how they possibly can be, and I doubt very much whether any serious employer believes that they are. And if they think they are, they may find that their employers disagree with that. I would have thought that those who are staying away from work will be quite near the top of any lists when the quite large numbers of redundancies which are coming are drawn up. I don't see how that can be avoided. The other thing which is operating here, it continues to be fear. It is the case, and you talk to people in all walks of life, at all levels of education experience, who genuinely believe that if they go back into an office or go into a shop or go on a train, that they're risking their lives. And they genuinely think this. And they think this because the government made them think it. And this is a fascinating thing. The great SAGE document of March the 22nd this year, as she said, a substantial number of people still do not feel personally threatened. The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased. And the government then went ahead and increased that level of personal threat, and it scared people stiff. And people are still afraid, and they still won't go on the trains, they still won't go into shops because they think they will catch a fatal disease.
Well, there is reason to be concerned if the government's saying that you have to wear. There is reason to be concerned if the government is saying that you have to wear a mask in order to use public transport. That there's a reason for that. Alison, you were smiling there while Peter was talking.
Well, I've been working from home from March, so I hope that he's wrong when he says that those people who are working from home are going to be the first that are going to be made redundant. Look, I didn't think that you could. You know, originally the first week I thought you can't put a newspaper out from home. It's just not going to work. We did manage to do it, and I think we've managed. The Irish News has managed to put out some really good newspapers, and I certainly have been working very hard as our health correspondent and other members of staff. I miss the office, and I do miss the fact that things get done a lot quicker if you're dealing with people by emails and WhatsApps and all sorts of other things instead of just shouting across a room to them. I think that there's direct communication missing there. You bounce ideas off each other. It's far more creative when you're all in the same place. And also there's a knock-on effect to the economy, because obviously if you're working in a city centre or in a building somewhere, then people are using the shops and the cafes and everything else around that, and that all suffers when we work from home. But I think in future there'll be like a more sort of blended, type of working. So people will choose maybe to work a few days a week in the office, but maybe then also a few days a week at home. And I think that could work quite well in relation to the commute and overcrowding and pollution on the roads and all sorts of other things. But I don't think it's healthy for people to be working solitary in a home by themselves, especially when you think of how a lot of younger people, they house share. So you're working at home and you're probably in a bedroom all day long. I don't think that's very good for people's mental health. So I do think we need to look at maybe a different way of working, but possibly maybe a combination of the two. going forward.
Yes, the future might be a mix of working from home and going into the office, maybe divided equally. Let's have a look at the Mirror. And this story, quite worrying, suggesting that universities could be the care homes of the second wave, that they could be a hotbed for the virus to thrive, with students going back to university in the coming weeks. Peter?
Well, I think this is absurd. We've just had an awful lot of effort devoted to explaining to us correctly that the risk to young people in schools from COVID-19 is extremely small. And now we have unions making out that the risk to young people in universities is comparable to the risk in care homes. Now, the care home crisis has still not been fully examined. I personally believe there should be a stringent public inquiry, probably a judicial inquiry into what happened. But to compare universities to that seems to me to be verging on the irresponsible. I think the university educations of huge numbers of young people have been devastated by the past few months. First of all, they had to put up with the college lecturers' strikes. Then they found that their courses were being conducted remotely, which is no real substitute for a university experience. Now they're being told stay away even longer. And these are people who are having to borrow very large sums of money to pay both for the fees and for the accommodation they have to occupy. And actually, in many cases, the university education is being wrecked. I think it should stop. I think people should get back to school and get back to university and get back to work as soon as possible to try and rescue what we can of the remains of our economy and the remains of our society, which is currently reeling from the blows dealt to it by a panic-stricken government.
Peter and Allison, thank you for the moment. We are going to take a break coming up. The Love Island stars paid to plug the government's test and trace scheme on social media. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me tonight, Irish News columnist Allison Morris and Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Let's have a look at this story in the Mail about influencers being paid thousands of pounds to promote the government's test and trace message. Positive message about the NHS they've been encouraged to give, and not to be critical of the government. Allison?
Yeah, well, we've just spoke about how, the government's talking about raising taxes in order to pay for all the money they're borrowing, and maybe that they should start looking for not paying people from reality shows to plug a government app. Apparently this is to be investigated by the Advertising Standards Agency, because the ads themselves should have made it clear that they were paid for content, and they didn't. And so we have, reality stars telling people to download this app, also saying how great it is, how it'll help protect you, and also being told not to criticise the government's handling of the COVID crisis. I'm not sure, I don't think Peter's probably not going to be a big Love Island fan, I imagine, but having watched a few episodes of it, I don't think any of them were going to give us like a really in-depth political analysis of the current situation. But maybe the government thought this was targeting young people and getting them to download the app. But at the same time, too, they're not the people who are in the most, dangerous group. So I do think that it's worth some more scrutiny, is to see where money from the public purse, at this point in time when every penny is scarce, is being paid, to pay reality stars, basically, to post stuff on Instagram.
I also doubt that Peter's a Love Island fan. But what do you make of this, Peter? Is this right, to pay thousands of pounds to influencers to put out a government message?
You can't drag me away from Love Island, but I am an old Fleet Street crocodile. I've had more than 40 years' experience in journalism, and I've visited some of the nastiest countries in the world. And I'm still genuinely shocked by this story, that a government in a supposedly free country, well run, is apparently resorting to such measures to put across what is basically a propaganda message. And I don't think it's what governments in free countries should be doing. The people who are doing it on their behalf, that's another matter. They probably don't really understand the significance of it. But for a government to be doing this, if what is being alleged is true, is genuinely shocking, and it gives some indication of the nature of the people who are running us at the moment. As for test and trace, what is so wonderful about it? I live in Oxford, where we're now being threatened with a supposed Amber Alert, because I think about 40 people in a population of 150,000 have been tested positive for COVID. I know people who have been badgered by post and by text to go and be tested. And all that happens if you're tested and you test positive, generally you have no symptoms, you're not ill. But the more people who do this, the more excuse there'll be to have another lockdown in Oxford, a city which is only just beginning to stagger out of
But if
the
you're
awful...
tested positive, you need to know so that you don't spread the virus. That's the point, isn't it?
Sorry, what is the point?
If you're tested positive, you need to know so that you don't then go on and spread the virus. So it is useful information.
This is that fascinating disease whose principal symptom is that you're perfectly well. What we are not told with these tests is how many of the people involved are hospitalised and how many are seriously ill or how many die. Because the reason we're not told this is because the numbers are extremely low. The positive tests are obtained by searching for them, and the more you search, the more you get. This is what happened in Leicester. They opened a whole new lot of testing centres. They then got the numbers of positive tests up, and they shut down the city. This doesn't seem to me to be either rational or sensible. The numbers of deaths from COVID-19 have been falling since April the 8th and are now down at an extraordinarily low level. And these positive tests are being paraded as if they meant that we were getting a huge resurgence of the disease. It simply is not comparable with what was going on in March.
There is still the threat. There is still the threat of a second wave. Has been much discussed. But let's quickly move on to the Star, just because it's bank holiday. But it's going to be the worst weather for 50 years. Alison.
Look, I live in Ireland. It's always freezing here. I'm always cold. And we don't get warm weather. We get like 2 days of summer a year. So it'll hardly make much difference to me. There has been a real chill in the air for it being August, and obviously it's a bank holiday tomorrow, and lots of people will be wanting to go out and about. But if you lived where I live,
great news. I have to stop you there. We've run out of time. Thank you both, Alison and Peter. Thank you.